Today you are going to hear the testimony of Khalid Ibn Hassan, a powerful imam, feared and respected in Damascus. His voice guided multitudes, but inside him there was a deafening silence, a question that haunted him night and day. What if the God I serve never truly knew me? Until one war-torn night, the impossible happened. A simple video on the internet, a speech by the American Charlie Kirk about freedom and Jesus Christ, ignited a spark that would change everything. The man who led prayers for the Islamic faith would soon face persecution, hunger, and a supernatural light that would transform his soul forever. Get ready. What you are about to see is a testimony that defies logic and reignites faith. And before we begin, make sure you are subscribed, like the video, and tell me where you are watching from, because this story is going to move you deeply.
When I close my eyes and return to that time, I can almost hear the sound of the call to prayer echoing from the mosque speakers, mingling with the desert heat and the scent of incense. My name is Khalid Ibn Hassan, and for many years I believed my life was exactly where it was meant to be. I was born into a respected, devout family, and from an early age I was taught that I was born to serve the faith. My father was a theologian, a man with a deep voice and disciplined eyes, who taught me to recite the Quran before I even learned to write my name. My grandfather was known throughout the region for interpreting the verses with precision, and my childhood was marked by long hours of study, kneeling on rugs, trying to understand what it meant to please God. I was the pride of my family. By the age of 15, I could recite long passages from the Holy Book by heart. By the age of 27, I had become the main imam of one of the largest mosques in Damascus. People called me the voice of faith, and I believed I was fulfilling the purpose for which I had been born. But inside me there was a quiet place, an emptiness that no prayer could fill. I saw men weeping for forgiveness, young people desperate for answers, mothers crying out for comfort. I listened to them, advised them, quoted verses, repeated the right words, and yet when the mosque emptied, the echo of their voices stayed trapped inside me. Something didn't make sense. If God was love, why did I fear him so much? Why did every mistake make me feel condemned? Why, even when following every rule, did I feel so far from him? These questions were dangerous. An imam does not doubt. An imam teaches, leads, commands. But inside my chest, doubt became a burden. I began to avoid looking at myself in the mirror because I no longer recognized the man I saw there. I preached confidence, but lived full of fear. I spoke of light, but felt increasingly surrounded by darkness. Sometimes, after the last call to prayer, I stayed alone in the empty hall, just watching the candle smoke rise, and I whispered to myself, "Why, God is merciful, do I feel so afraid of him?" Over time, my spiritual exhaustion turned into despair. I tried to convince myself that it was just a phase, that all men of faith faced doubt, but something inside me said the problem was deeper. I was empty. I preached words that no longer belonged to me. And within that silence, I began to sense that something was about to change. I just didn't know yet the price I would pay for it. Everything started to collapse on an ordinary day without warning. A colleague from the mosque, someone I considered a brother, began spreading rumors. He said that I questioned sacred teachings, that I was opening the door to Western ideas, that I had become dangerous. At first, I didn't pay attention. I thought they were just words carried by the wind, but in Damascus, words can become a sentence. Within a few days, I was called to a meeting. There were cold stares, veiled accusations. I heard terrible things, that I was a traitor to the faith, a disgrace, a man corrupted by doubt. And then came the final blow. I was removed from all my duties. In just 1 week, I lost everything I had built over 20 years. The doors of the mosque closed to me. My students stopped greeting me on the streets. Even my own family avoided my eyes. It was as if I had ceased to exist. Hidden in a small room on the outskirts of the city, I spent my nights in silence, listening to the distant sounds of bombs, the screams, the sirens, the cold wind slipping through the cracks in the window. It was there, in that forced isolation, that I began to understand what the true desert meant. During those sleepless nights I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "Allah, if you are real, speak to me. I can't bear the silence anymore." But the silence continued. No answer, no sign. It was as if my prayers hit the ceiling and came back to me. Fear began to blend with the feeling of abandonment. I, who had taught so many to trust, could no longer trust anything. The faith that once felt solid had become a castle made of sand. Then one night, tired of fighting my own thoughts, I grabbed an old cell phone I kept in a drawer. I just wanted to distract myself, to forget the loneliness for a while. I opened random videos on the internet and started scrolling without purpose, until something caught my attention. An American man was speaking passionately about faith, freedom, and truth. His name was Charlie Kirk. I had never heard of him, but the way he spoke was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't an empty sermon or a political speech. It was as if he were speaking directly to me. I clicked, and that simple decision would become the turning point of my life. Charlie said, "Freedom is not the right to do whatever you want, but the power to do what is right, and that freedom exists only in Jesus Christ." When I heard the name Jesus Christ, a chill ran through my body. I should have closed the video. I knew I wasn't allowed to listen to that, but I couldn't stop. Every word seemed to pierce the air and strike me deeply. It was as if someone on the other side of the world could see exactly what was happening inside me. The light from my cell phone seemed brighter, the air grew dense, and suddenly I felt something I had never felt before. Peace. A silent, profound peace that didn't depend on rituals or repeated prayers. Tears began to fall without me understanding why. I hadn't cried in years. Leaders don't cry. But that night, I cried like a child. I felt an invisible presence, as if someone had entered the room. The fear that had haunted me for so long disappeared, replaced by something indescribable, a love I didn't understand, but that enveloped me completely. When the video ended, I stood there motionless, staring at the blank screen. Something inside me had changed. I knew I would never be the same. I fell asleep with my face still wet with tears, and then, in the middle of the night, I had a dream. I was in a vast field, bathed in light, and a man in white was walking toward me. His eyes were steady, yet filled with tenderness. He held out his hands and said in a voice that seemed to pierce time, "Khalid, I know you. I died for you." These words echoed inside me like an explosion. I tried to respond, but I couldn't. I just fell to my knees. And then I woke, my heart racing, my body trembling, but my soul at peace. The sun was beginning to rise over the ruins of the city, and for the first time in my life, I felt alive. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't understand who the man in the dream was, but something told me I had been touched by something real, something no human explanation could deny. That morning, I sat on the floor of my small room and watched the light stream in through the broken window. The distant sound of prayers no longer stirred the same feeling. Within me, something new was beginning to emerge. I didn't know its name. I didn't know the path, but I was certain of one thing. My search for truth was just beginning, and it would take me farther than I could ever have imagined. I'll never forget the smell of that place. The air was heavy, damp, and it felt like every breath cost me a piece of my life. The walls were covered in scars and rust, and the cold floor served as a bed for my ruined soul. I, Khalid Ibn Hassan, the man who once led prayers and led crowds, was now just a prisoner, sitting in the dark, surrounded by voices that hated me. It all happened too quickly. Days after that dream and the presence that had transformed my soul, what remained of my peace vanished like dust. The men discovered that I had watched and, worse, shared videos about Jesus. In that region, this simple act was considered treason. They didn't just want to silence me, they wanted to erase every trace of what I had seen. When they invaded the small room where I lived, I didn't try to escape. There was nowhere to run. They dragged me through the streets, tied me up, and took me to a damp basement that smelled of mold and despair. It was a makeshift cell, far from the eyes of any authority. Inside, time seemed to stand still. On the first day, they interrogated me for hours. They asked with hatred, "Did you watch that video?" I remained silent. "Speak, are you still one of them?" And all I could think was, if I open my mouth, they will hear the name they fear most. "So," I said softly, almost in a whisper that I didn't even recognize, "I saw the truth. They beat me, starved me, and returned the next day. Each day dragged on like a year. My body ached, but what weighed most heavily was the loneliness. I felt hungry, thirsty, but deep within me was something no torture could tear away, a peace I couldn't explain. At night, when silence fell, I prayed. Not like before, with rituals and memorized phrases. I simply said, "Jesus, I trust in you." Those words were all I had left. By the 10th day, I could barely stand. The floor was my bed, and the ceiling my only witness. I remembered Charlie Kirk's words from the video. "Freedom is the power to do what is right." And I began to realize that even imprisoned, I was freer than I had ever been. I could deny everything, say what they wanted to hear, and maybe I would get out alive. But to deny what I had felt would be to betray the only truth that had finally set me free. With each knock on the door, I knew another session of questions and threats was about to begin. They wanted me to say that Jesus was just a man. They wanted me to repeat old phrases, to return to being the obedient imam. But something in me had already died, and something new had been born. I couldn't go back. Hours turned into days, days turned into weeks. My body no longer responded. Hunger burned in my stomach. My skin clung to my bones. I remembered the face of the man in white from my dream and wondered if he was still with me there, in that darkness. One night, as I silently recited, "Jesus, I trust in you," I felt something strange. A gentle, almost imperceptible presence, like a breeze in the midst of despair. And I heard it inside me, without sound, without voice, just like a pure thought. "I am here." I cried. Not tears of despair, but with the certainty that I was not alone. Even in the depths of hell there was a light. On the 29th day, I no longer had the strength to even pray. The words came only to my mind. I felt my body weaken. I lay on the floor and thought, "If this is the end, let it be in your arms." And then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, it was no longer darkness that surrounded me. It was the deafening sound of explosions. The ground shook. The wall in front of me collapsed. I remember only light, dust and light, and a force pushing me back, protecting my body. It all happened in seconds, then silence. I woke up confused, covered in dust, surrounded by debris. Men spoke in another language. Firm, hurried voices. I heard a phrase I will never forget. "We found someone alive." "He's alive." They were Christian soldiers from a humanitarian aid force. They had stormed the building after the attack. One of them picked me up and asked my name. I tried to answer, but all I could do was cry. I was taken to a field hospital. I remember the bright lights, the hands touching me, the doctor's voice saying, "You should be dead, but it seems someone protected you." These words echoed within me like divine confirmation. Days later, when I could stand, I walked over to a small mirror hanging on the wall of the barracks. The reflection staring back at me was that of a transformed man. I looked different, weaker, older, but there was something new in my eyes. I no longer saw fear, I saw faith. I was silent for a long time, just trying to comprehend. What had happened in that basement wasn't luck, it wasn't coincidence. I had been kept. Someone, the one who had visited me in the dream, had kept me alive. And it was then that I realized the true miracle. It wasn't just that I was breathing. The miracle was what was happening inside me. That proud man, full of rules and certainties, had died. and in his place was born someone new, someone who finally understood the meaning of the word freedom. But freedom, I soon realized, also had consequences. After a few weeks of recovery, I was told to flee Syria. My name was already on execution lists. Anyone who had heard about my arrest knew I was no longer the same. I was a threat, not just political, but spiritual. I crossed the border in the early hours of the morning, hidden between trucks, guided by a volunteer. I remember the biting cold and the feeling of walking between two worlds, the old and the new. I arrived in Turkey with little more than the clothes on my back and a conviction in my heart. There was no turning back. But even from afar, the persecution reached me. Within days, I learned that my family had disowned me. My wife took our children and declared in a letter that I was a traitor. She wrote, "You have brought shame on the name of your ancestors. Never speak to us again." Those words cut me more than any physical blow. I stared at that piece of paper for hours, imagining my children's faces, the sound of their voices, and I realized the price of faith was high. I had lost everything, family, home, identity, but strangely, I didn't feel defeated. Taking refuge in makeshift shelters, among canvas tents and dirty mattresses, I found a small Bible left behind by a missionary. It was old, the pages yellowed, but when I opened it, something inside me stirred. I began reading it secretly, at night with a dim flashlight, while the wind swayed the shelter. Every word seemed to speak directly to me. I read about grace, forgiveness, and unconditional love. It was as if that book had been written for me. There was something different about Jesus' words. They weren't commands, they were promises. They weren't threats, they were invitation. One day I came to the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6, and I read, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." I stopped. It was the exact same phrase I'd heard in the dream, spoken by the man in white. In that instant, the ground disappeared beneath my feet. The tears came again, strong, uncontrollable. I fell to my knees and cried until I had no more strength. I knew, without a doubt, without fear, that it was him. The same one who visited me in the dream, the same one who saved me in the basement. There, kneeling amid the filth, I understood that faith was not a set of rituals, but a living relationship. That the God I feared was, in fact, the God who loved me. Even alone, even hungry, even afraid, I felt a flame within me that nothing could extinguish. Each day was a mixture of pain and hope. Sometimes I would walk the Turkish streets, watching the people move about and think, they have no idea what God has done for me. Life remained hard. I had no money, no job, and nowhere to go. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered the basement, the dust, the screaming voices, and the explosion. I remembered waking up alive among the rubble, and the memory of the miracle kept me going. Sometimes missionaries would come to the shelter to distribute food and clothing. I watched them amazed by their joy. There was no preaching, just gestures. One of them gave me a small wooden cross. He said, "This is just a symbol, but it can remind you that someone died for love of you." I closed my hand around the cross and felt something pulse inside me. It wasn't superstition, it was faith. On those cold nights, I would hold that little cross and pray, "Jesus, thank you. I don't understand everything, but I know you are with me." Faith didn't take away my fear, but it taught me to walk with it. It didn't bring me easy answers, but it showed me that God's silence is also presence. And so, step by step, I realized the miracle hadn't ended in the basement. It was happening every day, with every breath I took, with every page of the Bible I read, with every sunrise I found myself alive. And inside me, something told me that this story was just beginning. When I left Turkey and finally stepped onto American soil, a mixture of relief and uncertainty washed over me. I, Khalid Ibn Hassan, a man who for years had been the voice of a rigid and unquestionable faith, now walked in a land where no one knew who I was or what had happened to me. I was a foreigner with a dangerous past and a story that seemed too impossible to tell. The wide streets, the lights, the language, everything seemed new. And yet within me, an insistent echo whispered, "You still have something to do." At first, I tried to live in silence. I helped out with odd jobs, cleaned warehouses, and translated from Arabic to English in exchange for food. At night, I slept in a simple room rented with the help of a small local church. I remembered my days at the mosque, the crowds that followed me, and smiled with a kind of silent irony. The imam, who once spoke to hundreds, now translated subtitles for Christian videos, trying to relearn how to live. But inside me, something burned. I knew my story wasn't over. It had just changed shape. Then, a few weeks later, I received an unexpected email. The sender was the pastor of a small church in Texas. He had heard about my story through missionaries and wrote to me simply, "Brother Khalid, we would like you to share your testimony with us. Your story can awaken faith in many hearts." For a few seconds I stared at that message like someone staring at a sentence. My heart raced. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, but another, the part marked by pain and fear, hesitated. I knew the weight of telling this story. I knew how much anger it provoked in some. Deep down, I was afraid to relive it all, afraid that speaking it out loud would open wounds that still bled silently. The days passed, and the invitation remained, like a call impossible to ignore. I saw the pastor's name on the screen and felt a soft voice say to me, "It was no wonder you survived." So after praying, I answered. I said I would go. The drive to Texas was long. I spent hours staring out the bus window, observing the landscapes, the fields, the roadside churches. Everything seemed calm, but inside me, a storm was brewing. I constantly wondered if I was ready, and more than that, if people would believe me. After all, who would believe that an ancient Islamic leader had encountered Jesus after watching an online video? It sounded like a movie plot, but I knew it was true, and that truth throbbed in my chest. I arrived in the small town late in the afternoon. The pastor welcomed me with a simple, sincere hug. The church building was modest, made of light wood, with a small garden in front. There was a reverent silence in the air, the kind of peace I'd always sought. He showed me the pulpit where I would speak the following evening. As I climbed the steps, I felt a chill, the same chill I'd felt when I first turned on my cell phone and heard Charlie Kirk speak of Jesus. It felt like, once again, something sacred was about to happen. But that night in the simple hotel where I was staying, the peace was shattered. My phone vibrated with a notification, an anonymous message, no name, no known number. I opened it, and the words seemed like fire on the screen. "If you step into that pulpit, you will die an infidel." My entire body froze. It was as if the ghosts of my past had crossed the ocean to find me. I stood in silence for a moment, staring at that sentence, and the old fear, the one I thought I'd left behind in Syria, came back with a vengeance. Images of the basement, the cold, the hunger, the threatening voices came flooding back. I knew what those warnings meant. I knew how serious they were. I spent the night awake. I paced back and forth, wondering if I should give up. The reasoning was simple. Just send a message, cancel the testimony, and everything would be fine. No one would judge me. After all, I had suffered enough. But something inside me wouldn't let me. I remembered Jesus' words from the dream. "I know you. I died for you." And I thought, can I deny the one who gave me life? Dawn arrived, and exhaustion overcame me. I fell asleep for a few minutes, and then the impossible happened again. I dreamed of him, the same man in white, the same presence that had visited me in Syria. He approached, and his voice was calm but firm, like the sound of the wind speaking to the heart. "Speak, Khalid, because there is another man who needs to hear me." I woke with tears in my eyes and an unshakable conviction. That dream wasn't just a comfort, It was a command. I couldn't run away. There was someone in that church who needed to hear what God had done in my life. The next day, the sun rose hotter than ever. The small temple was packed. Simple people, entire families, young and old, all waiting to hear the man from the East who knew Jesus. I sat in the front row, clutching a bottle of water, feeling my palms sweat. Every minute felt like an eternity. When the pastor called me, my legs trembled. I climbed the steps slowly, and for a moment I thought I wouldn't be able to speak. The microphone felt like it weighed a ton. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes and said softly, "Jesus, speak for me." And then I started. The words came out shaky at first, but soon gained strength. I told him about childhood, about doubts, about emptiness. I told him about the Charlie Kirk video, about the words that changed my life. Freedom is the power to do what is right, and that freedom exists only in Christ. I told them about the dream, about the basement, about the explosion. People cried. Others just closed their eyes and prayed silently. In the crowd, I saw a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, sitting at the back. His gaze was fixed on me, as if every word struck him directly. He had Arab features. When I mentioned the name of Jesus, I saw tears begin to stream down his face. It was as if I were seeing a younger version of myself years ago, caught between fear and truth. After I finished speaking, silence fell over the church. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the young man stood up, walked to the front, and fell to his knees, weeping. He said in Arabic, "I also want to know this Jesus." The pastor approached, embraced him, and together we prayed for him. That moment seemed suspended in time. I no longer saw people, no longer heard anything. I only felt a living presence in that place, the same one that had freed me from the darkness. That night, as the young man gave his heart to Christ, I understood why I survived, why I was spared, why my story didn't end in the basement. My pain had become a mission. In the following months, my life took on new purpose. I began helping churches translate Christian content into Arabic, recording testimonies and subtitling videos, including those of Charlie Kirk, the man who, unbeknownst to him, had first told me about Jesus. When he heard my story, he sent me a message, simple yet powerful. "Brother, the gospel is the bridge that unites the world. Carry on." Today, I spend my days working in front of the computer, translating messages, editing videos, helping people living through the same conflict that once destroyed my soul. I receive messages from men and women in hiding in the Middle East who say, "I watched your story, and now I know I'm not alone." Every time I read this, I get a chill. I remember myself, that night when, hidden, I watched Charlie Kirk talk about Jesus and felt the impossible happen. Now I'm the voice echoing on the other side of the screen. At the conferences and churches I visit, I often say the same phrase because it carries the most truth in everything I've experienced. I didn't find a new religion. I found the God who always sought me. And every time I repeat this, I remember that my life is proof that God speaks through the most unlikely means, even through a video lost on the internet, seen by a desperate man in a dark room in Damascus. The former imam, who once led prayers in a mosque, now raises his hands, no longer in ritual, but in worship. When I close my eyes and sing, I still hear the mosque's call echoing in my memories, but it no longer holds me captive. Today, the sound that fills my heart is that of grace. I became a new man, not a perfect man, but someone who bears scars that tell a story of redemption. And each one reminds me that faith isn't the end of pain, it's the beginning of purpose. When I look back on the path I've traveled, I realize that the true miracle wasn't surviving that explosion. The true miracle was discovering that even in the silence, even in the pain, God was preparing me for something greater. And that's why, every time I step up to the podium, when I hold the microphone and tell my story, I feel the same chill down my spine, the same chills I felt the day it all began. Because I know, with absolute certainty, that every word spoken has a purpose, and that there's always someone, somewhere, who needs to hear that there's still hope. Khalid Ibn Hassan's mission continues, but the man speaking today is not the Imam of Damascus. He is a servant who learned with his own blood that faith is not an escape. It is a reunion with the God who never stopped calling him by name. And so, between translations, travels, lectures, and tears, I carry on. I'm still moved to see people finding the same love that found me, because in the end, everything I've experienced, all the pain, all the loss, all the fear, has served this purpose, to show that Christ's love is greater than any border, and that no story is irreversible when grace decides to rewrite it.
And if you've made it this far, take a deep breath with me. Because this story isn't just about Khalid Ibn Hassan. It's about me, about you, and about everyone who has ever felt lost, afraid, or without answers. What happened in his life is living proof that no one is too far away for Jesus to reach. He was in a dark basement, surrounded by hate and despair, but even there, the light found him. And perhaps today, that same light is trying to reach your heart. You may have come to this video out of curiosity, but God never does anything by chance. So, if you feel something different inside, if these words touched your heart, say it now with faith. I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. Write this sentence in the comments, I accept Jesus, and know that you are not alone. Every message that appears here is a soul saying yes to eternal life. And if this story touched you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share so that more people can experience the transforming power of Christ's love. And if you prepare, look at the screen. The next video is already waiting for you. An even more intense story of a man who was left 30 days without food for Hamas after watching Charlie Kirk. But Jesus saved him. Don't miss it. Click now, because the same God who freed Khalid continues to perform miracles, and perhaps the next one will be in your life. Comment, I love Jesus. And see you in the next testimony.